In the 19th century, circuses didn't just parade acrobats and clowns, they leaned hard into the bizarre. Alongside the main acts, many offered freak shows, where audiences paid to gawk at people with rare physical conditions or waxed-up replicas. These sideshows spotlighted human wonders, people labeled as curiosities just because they looked unique. For many performers, it wasn't just a stage, it was survival in a world that refused to accept them. Today, we're diving into 15 of the scariest, strangest, and most unforgettable circus freaks that actually existed. Number 15, Ernie Defor. Ernie was born on July 7, 1931, and for most of his childhood, he shared his body with someone else, his parasitic twin, Len. The twin was attached to Ernie's chest, a small, underdeveloped body with no ability to speak or move. Still, it was clearly human. Doctors and crowds alike were drawn in, unsure where Ernie ended and Len began. They were called two boys with one head, or sometimes just Ernie Len. The situation wasn't treated with dignity. He was labeled as the world's strangest living boy in press clippings. In late 1943, when Ernie was around 12, surgeons removed Len in a procedure that made headlines. What came after is mostly quiet. Some reports say he married later in life. Others claim he might still be alive today. But for a while, Ernie was a living mystery, a kid carrying another body on his chest, trying to live while the world stared. His story still leaves people wondering who he became. He was a mystery. Number 14, Robert Earl Hughes. Robert was born in 1926, and by the time he turned 10, he weighed over 800 pounds. By adulthood, his weight had pushed past 1,000. At his heaviest, he was 1,069 pounds and held the title of the world's heaviest man. The cause was believed to be a malfunctioning thyroid gland, but it was more than just biology. It was life, lived entirely outside the range of normal. Hughes could still move, but slowly. He had to stop often to rest, leaning against a stick, pacing himself yard by yard. He appeared at carnivals and fairs, not out of pride, but because it gave him something to do and a way to earn. Plans to appear on The Ed Sullivan Show were made but never happened. In 1958, a bout of measles led to uremia, and he passed away at just 32. Despite the rumors, he wasn't buried in a piano case, but the coffin was massive, just like him. Number 13, Veles Campos. Veles Campos was born on August 23, 1933 in Fortuna, Puerto Rico, and what set him apart was simple. His knee bent the wrong way. It didn't hurt. It wasn't from an accident. It was just how he was built. Instead of hiding it, Campos embraced it. He turned that rare ability into a sideshow act and began performing as a contortionist, shocking crowds by twisting his leg backward without a wince. It wasn't magic or illusion. It was anatomy that didn't follow the rules. Ripley's Believe It or Not picked up his story and included him in their Encyclopedia of the Bizarre, placing him among the likes of sword swallowers and human blockheads. But Campos wasn't trying to be grotesque or shocking. He just leaned into what made him different. His story doesn't come with dramatic headlines or tragic endings. It's a quieter one, about a performer who found a place by doing the one thing nobody else could do and making it look easy. Number 12, Rose and Paul. In 1930, a haunting photograph surfaced from Ciudad, Mexico. It showed two children, Rose and Paul, whose skin was thick, wrinkled, and rough like an elephant's. The condition wasn't made up or exaggerated. They were born with it. Paul in 1919, Rose in 1921. Doctors struggled to name the disease, but the photo alone became enough to make them subjects of whispered stories and speculation. They weren't part of a traveling circus, at least not publicly, but their image traveled without them. People called them elephant-skinned children, a phrase that was less about diagnosis and more about spectacle. There's little information about what became of them. No known death dates, no adult records. Their parents were said to be healthy, ordinary people with no family history of the condition. Whatever Rose and Paul experienced in their short time in the public eye, it's clear their story wasn't just about rare skin. It was about the cruel way strangers turned them into something else entirely. Number 11. The musical contortionist. In the 1910s, a man known only as Smith, or possibly Max, took the stage with a banjo and a body that bent like few others could. While many contortionists twisted themselves into knots for shock value, he brought something else to the performance: music. As he bent backward, folded sideways, and perched on one foot in shapes that barely looked human, he played rhythm and melody with ease. They called him the musical contortionist. It wasn't a flashy title, but it told you everything. He didn't scream or crack jokes. He didn't act like a sideshow caricature. He just made his body move in impossible ways while strumming a tune, treating the whole performance like it was the most natural thing in the world. We don't know where he came from or where he went after the spotlight faded. But for a moment, this man made something bizarre feel oddly graceful, like a song played from inside a broken mirror. Number 10. Sissy Cook. Born in 1901 as Nanny Mae Hill, Sissy Cook was known across the sideshow circuit as the Armless Wonder. But that name didn't quite capture how precise and capable she truly was. She had no arms, only short stubs, and 3 toes on each foot. Yet she embroidered, crocheted, and even fed herself with a calm, practiced ease that stopped people in their tracks. Married to Ben Hill until his passing in 1967, Sissy spent decades traveling between carnivals, often behind the wheel of her little golf cart. She never leaned into tragedy, never asked for sympathy. People would ask about her condition, and she'd fire back with a joke instead of an explanation. Her life was built on defying expectations without making a show of it. When she passed away in 1973, those who knew her didn't speak about her missing limbs. They talked about her independence, her humor, and her steady confidence that never once needed a stage. Number 9. Pyramal Sammy. Pyramal Sammy from India came into the world with a parasitic twin attached to his torso, so it was obvious the promoters saw a gimmick right away. They dressed the second, smaller body in a girl's costume and billed the act as Pyramal and Sammy, convincing audiences that 2 siblings shared one body. Pyramal toured globally, often alongside his cousin Subramanian Munsamy, a little person, and others billed under cruel nicknames. Between 1900 and 1915, he performed under the Ringling Brothers banner, pulling large crowds but enduring small-minded treatment. He reportedly hated performing in America. The cultural ignorance, constant gawking, and disrespect left him exhausted. When he had the chance, he returned to India and left the sideshow behind for good. After that, his name faded from the records. But his story remains one of the more troubling reminders that not every act in the circus chose to be there. Pyramal wasn't a freak character in a show. He was a man who got out while he still could. Number 8. Lazarus and Joannes Colorado. Lazarus Colorado lived in the 17th century Europe, a time when medical science was primitive and curiosity often looked like cruelty. Attached to his chest was his brother Joannes, silent, underdeveloped, and completely dependent. Joannes couldn't speak or move on his own, but he was visibly alive, and that unsettled people more than any act ever could. The brothers didn't sing, dance, or perform tricks. They simply stood in front of audiences, letting their existence do all the work. Lazarus traveled and earned money by allowing people to look, even when he knew they wouldn't understand what they were seeing. They weren't treated with compassion, but they weren't passive victims either. They found a way to survive in a world that gave them no other path. Over time, their presence became a quiet landmark in early exhibition history. They didn't shape the freak show genre with spectacle, but by making people question what nature was capable of, and what society was willing to pay to see. What do you think about them? Number 7. The Oklahoma Outlaw Mannequin Mummy. Elmer McCurdy wasn't much of an outlaw. He was drunk, reckless, and terrible at crime. After a botched train robbery in 1911, he was shot and killed by lawmen. That should have been the end, but it wasn't. The local mortician embalmed him with such skill that his body dried out like old leather. For 5 years, McCurdy stood upright in a funeral home, unclaimed. Eventually, a carnival promoter pretended to be a relative and hauled him away, marketing the corpse as the Oklahoma Outlaw. For the next 60 years, Elmer's body was dragged through sideshows, wax exhibits, and even amusement park attractions. People thought he was just another mannequin until 1976, when a film crew on The $6 Million Man accidentally broke off his arm and discovered real bone inside. A ticket stub in his mouth helped authorities identify him. In 1977, Elmer was finally buried. They poured concrete over the grave. This time, they made sure the road show was over for good. Number 6. The world's tallest Santa. Yakob Nackan didn't spend his life trying to be a spectacle. He simply existed in a body that made it impossible to blend in. Standing at 8 feet 1 inch, he toured Europe in the early 20th century under the name Uranus, drawing crowds who had never seen anyone so tall. When war broke out, he was drafted into the German army and later captured by Allied forces, a moment the press twisted into sensational headlines. After the war, Yakob moved to America and found work not as a curiosity, but as Santa Claus. For years, he greeted children, appeared in parades, and quietly redefined what it meant to be seen. He wasn't chasing applause or trying to sell a story. People remembered him not just for his height, but for how calmly and kindly he carried himself. His life wasn't built on spectacle. It was built on small, steady gestures that reminded everyone that dignity doesn't depend on scale. Now, let's move to number 5, the second Anato. Gene Hayes didn't invent the act, but he kept it alive. His brother Ed Hayes, known as Anato, had built fame as the anatomical wonder, contorting his torso until it looked completely hollow. Gene followed behind, not with envy, but with respect. When Ed slowed down, Gene picked up the name and carried it into smaller tents, state fairs, and quieter corners of the carnival circuit. He couldn't match Ed's control, but he still stunned audiences. He could compress his chest so dramatically that people stopped breathing for a second. Most thought they were seeing Ed again. It didn't matter. Jean made the act his own. He posed for photos, leaned into the physical absurdity, and carried the weight of a name that didn't start with him. He may not have reached the same level of recognition, but in the flickering spaces of old sideshow memory, Gene Hayes left a mark. Not as a copy, not as a shadow, but as his own version of something strange. Number 4. The world's largest moose. Jack Eckhart wasn't trying to hide from the creepy world. He was too big for that. Born weighing 19 pounds, he was already larger than most toddlers. By the time he was 10, he weighed 265 pounds and had joined P.T. Barnum's show. Over time, he branded himself as the world's largest moose, sometimes just the elk, playing off fraternal lodge imagery. At his peak, he weighed 739 pounds. But Jack never treated his body like a burden. He posed for photos in draped robes, always smiling and entirely comfortable in his own skin. He toured for decades, making his size into a livelihood instead of a limitation. In 1937, his life ended suddenly in a car accident when a truck crushed his vehicle. His coffin had to be custom built, 6 times the usual size. But no part of his life was quiet or small. Not his size, not his laughter, not his memory. Jack lived big in every sense, and he didn't apologize for any of it. He was a real legend in every sense. Number 3, Rudolph Ivanovich and Heinrich Haag. Rudolph had thick hair growing across his entire body, from face to back, giving him the appearance of something wild and untamed. He played into that image on stage, crouching behind cage bars and snarling while onlookers whispered stories about Siberian beasts. Heinrich Hogg, on the other hand, had skin so elastic he could stretch it inches from his body, folding and pulling it in ways that defied expectation. There was no grand illusion behind either man's act, just physical traits they chose to turn into income. The crowds came out of morbid fascination, but these performers were not trapped by their conditions. They controlled how they were seen, how long they were watched, and how much they earned for the trouble. Doctors called it strange. Audiences called it bizarre. But for Rudolph and Heinrich, it was work, and it was theirs. They didn't play roles. They presented reality, raw and simple, and let the rest take care of itself. Number 2, the man with hanging skin. Arthur Luce didn't do tricks. He didn't speak much. He just stood there, and people couldn't stop looking. Born with neurofibromatosis, a condition that causes tumors and skin overgrowth, Arthur's face was covered in folds so heavy they draped down from his jaw like melting clay. In 1933, he appeared at Ripley's Auditorium in Chicago. Unlike many performers who came and went, he stayed in public memory for decades. At 42, he became a fixture. People didn't come for words. They came because his appearance challenged what they understood as human. Arthur didn't play a role, didn't dress it up. He just let people see him as he was. The last known trace of him was in 1991, when he was reportedly dying at age 97. Nearly a century lived inside a body others could never look past. But what stayed with people wasn't just the skin. It was his silence, his presence, and the quiet strength that came from showing up anyway. Number 1, pickled punks. At first glance, they looked fake. Rows of glass jars lined up in tents, each one filled with some tiny suspended form, sometimes distorted, sometimes human. Pickled punks, as they were called, were either real fetal remains or convincing wax replicas. No movement, no voice. Just stillness preserved in formaldehyde. Some were medical specimens that slipped into carnival hands. Others were fabricated to push boundaries. Either way, they weren't meant to entertain in the usual sense. People didn't laugh or clap. They leaned in, they stared. Then they left without speaking. These displays weren't acts. They were questions in a jar. What was real? What was right? What did curiosity cost? Whether created or collected, the punks offered no answers. Just floating silence that drew more crowds than any sword swallower ever could. They were never meant to be understood. They were meant to be remembered. And for better or worse, that's exactly what they did. If you've enjoyed watching this video, be sure to like it, share it, and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.